the kind of resilience, sacrifice, endurance that we have, we should preserve that for the country. Be kind and be cheerful giver. Love our country better than any other country. That's the only one that we have. And we must continue to protect the integrity of our government and leadership. The New Hope is alive, well, and fine, and Nigerians will continue to be very hopeful. Without hope, there's no salvation. Without hope, there's no development. Without hope, there's no life.
Well, as the President Bola Tinubu speaking right there. Well, this morning we're joined by Sheikh Nuruddin Lemu, who is the Director of Research and Training at the Dawah Institute of Nigeria. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program. Eid Mubarak to you as well.
Eid Mubarak, Chamberlain. Glad to meet you again.
Thank you. So, amidst all of these messages and greetings, the President calling for hope, trying to rally as many as possible Nigerians. How do you reconcile the significance of the occasion of this holiday, of festivities, Salah, and our current realities? How do we move with that?
Firstly, Eid Mubarak to you and everyone. One of the traditional roles that religion has played in every community has been to work on improving the quality of human character and human relationships. So when we look at our current situation, and it's important to remember every generation will have their own current situation. This is planet Earth. It's not heaven. We thank God it's not hell. Alhamdulillah. But a few weeks ago, our Christian brethren finished their own Lent, which was a 40-day fasting. And this year, that 40-day fasting overlaps with the Muslim month of Ramadan. And Ramadan for Muslims is a retreat period where we go through what you will call spiritual training with weights. In other words, the life of any religious person, definitely a Muslim, is one that should be characterized with acts of devotion that connect you with God, that help you become more selfless in your acts of good, your focus on others, not just yourself, but your focus on others. So our hope is that by the end of Ramadan, just as by the end of every act of worship, even if it is by 1%, you're a better human being at the end than you were when you started. And so I think what the president and all our leaders who speak on Ramadan are reminding us of is that responsibility to use the various instruments. Fasting is one instrument religion uses to help human beings. Prayer is another, devotion is another, congregational acts, another instrument that also plays its own role. So I think in looking at how to improve our situation, Ramadan, at least for Muslims, and Lent for Christians, that these are among the tools, not the only tools, but among the tools that help the individual improve things within their center or circle of influence. Thank you.
Yeah, so as things are and has been over the years, what's your impression as to how, at least, what kind of, has religion actually played that role? But we have a lot of religious people occupying different key positions, and several people actually think we should bring all of those tenets of our faith to bear in leadership, amongst the environment, because society is supposed to be better for it after all. That's what they preach.
I think so long as something is good, we definitely want more of it. What's important is to agree that it is good for us. It may not need the name religion attached to it if what you want is to solve corruption, if that will help us handle our challenges together. If you look at religion as being like a battery charger. So for me, my battery charger is called Islam. And for a Christian, their battery charger would be called Christianity. And if mine charges me to be a better, more useful human being, and yours charges you to be a better and more useful human being, then the world is a better place because of that. If, however, it's not charging your faith, it's just a ploy, it's just a decoy, it's just a wolf in sheep's clothing, then we shouldn't allow the clothing of religion to deceive us from the reality of what a person is. So it's really important that while we emphasize the importance of religion, we should not forget when we talk about religion, we are talking about it with the spirit of the faith, not looking just at the theatricals, the clothing, the beard, the words. We want to see character at the end, because if there's no character, if there's no compassion coming out of people, if there's no struggle against corruption, if there's no justice, that is empty religion. That is not the religion that Jesus, Moses, Muhammad, Abraham, peace be upon all of them, taught us. So I think let's really be introspectful and not allow the wording of religion to put a halo of immunity on individuals, on institutions. All should be transparent, accountable, and we need to be sure that it is actually good that is being done in the name of religion, and not just hypocrisy or taking advantage of the good name of religion to perpetuate atrocities.
Okay, but one of our platforms will be crossing over for the Dawah in Bauchi, which is going on at the moment. But yeah, we'll continue here on this matter about the significance. But from what you've seen over the years, and probably now, can there be, what would you identify as the missing link? What needs to be done to ensure that at least we're closer to setting the right examples across board?
I think one is to ensure that we have institutions that call out on wrongdoing irrespective of who's involved. Institutions that have courage. Unfortunately, where we are now is when a religious institution is involved in corruption, is involved in money laundering, is involved in supporting violence against innocent people. Just because it's religious, we want to protect the name and those involved. I think that is a cowardly approach, an insincere approach. And I think it is important that good people in each religious faith, good people coming from each religious tradition, to identify those teachings they have in common, see how to ensure those are protected from the misbehavior. We all have our wolves in sheep's clothing. We all have those who claim to be of the same flock, but who, undermine the community. So I think it's important for rule of law to be boldly and courageously applied across the board. Some forms of violence, because somebody has said it's religious, then somehow the people involved get immunity. This should be completely rejected. It should never be tolerated. God does not support any form of injustice, and anybody trying to use religion to support any form of injustice is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or not bold enough to call out wrong. When we see something wrong, we should correct it with our hands. If we can't, then with our tongues. We must do the best we can. Otherwise, if you can't improve the things around you, then, what's the use of religion? And I think we've seen good being done, both in the area of helping the poor, both in the area of promoting transparency, interfaith relations, peace building, establishing early warning systems so that those conflicts that are actually about resources or ethnic identity or a mixture of religious and ethnic identity, that those people who would like to perpetuate those, we have groups within the country that have been working together to minimize that. But as always, there's still a lot to be done. There's always room for improvement.
Well, Sheikh Lemu, it's good to see you indeed, and Eid Mubarak to you.
Thank you, Mope. Pleasure meeting you again.
It indeed. Well, I know that that's an area that you've done quite a bit of work on, identifying, common areas that Islam has with other faiths and seeing how we can propagate that and, protect those areas. I am just a little, curious sometimes, as a religious cleric, as somebody who has spent years of his life speaking to people, helping and guiding people along the path of their faith. Do you sometimes get discouraged when you see the kind of behaviors that people sometimes put up? I mean, all you have to do is watch movies sometimes, and you see that, even the bad people, when they're about to go and carry out a bad act, they pray before they go. You have to ask sometimes, are they aware of what it is, what it means, what prayer is supposed to mean, what, spirituality, what faith is all about? Or you see that, sometimes kidnappers that we hear sometimes pray, and they're holding people hostage. Do you ever wonder if people get the message, if they understand what faith is all about?
You're absolutely right. It can get demoralizing when you see, particularly if it's people who you respect. It can be very demoralizing. However, what every tradition has is a daily recharging. Christians, especially the devout Christians, the same thing with Muslims, would pray more than once a day. In other words,
It appears that we just lost him briefly, but as he said, it can be demoralizing when, he said the people you respect. I mean, I don't think anyone has any respect for kidnappers. But you never can tell, because these people too, in their own circles, you never can tell the people that look up to them, not knowing what it is that they do for a living.
Yeah, part of the significance of some of these things is that, it's a job of work, actually. It's tough, it's arduous, but they've got to keep that going on. Yeah, so I think we've got them.
So, Sheikh, sorry, we lost you for a bit, and we couldn't hear you at some point. But yes, you were saying that it can be demoralizing if these people are people that you respect in society.
Yeah, I mean, there are people who you would say, okay, these people are ignorant, these people don't know, and okay, our job as a community is to continue to educate. When it is people who you have been working with and you sense corruption and unfaithfulness, it can be demoralizing as human beings when, you work with people and then one of them is disappointing. That's natural. But I think we also are reminded by our various religious traditions to recognize that the reason why we do good is because we want to get closer to God. It's because God wants it. It's not because others are doing it, but because we are in this world to fulfill our personal, private mission, and we can do more if we collaborate with others. So every time a Muslim, a Christian goes to pray and charges their battery, they come back while still a bit frustrated with how others or what others are doing or not doing. We still recognize that all God expects of me is that I do my best. And under the circumstances, the best I can do is A, B, C, D, and well, I'll go ahead and, put that into action. So I think we just have to keep reminding ourselves, not everybody is going to on board with any project. You will always find the late adopters, those who will never adopt, those who will actually fight against whatever initiatives you have. But it's to look for good people, to really, be introspective, look at your own intention and motives, and make sure that you are not part of the problem, that you don't worry yourself too much with the speck in the eye of the other, forgetting the log in your own eye, or you see the faults of others, you don't see yours, because this is a problem we have as humans, very self-serving biases that we have. So I think, yes, it can be demoralizing, but at the same time, when you look, and this is partly because, forgive me for saying so, bad news is what news is. If it bleeds, it leads, they say. And so sometimes too much exposure, especially in those to those news items that can really demoralize you, they can actually cripple you. You just feel so helpless and overwhelmed. Instead of just focusing on what you can do, you get distracted by all the things you cannot do. So I feel, yes, it can be demoralizing, but at the same time, you look at those who, under those demoralizing circumstances, are still doing a lot. And that encourages us at the same time. So I think a lot depends on who you look at. You can look at those who are messing things up. You can look at those who are doing what they can with what they have, with whom they know now, and you can be inspired. So I think one is really an issue of perspective. Where do you choose to focus on? The cup half full or the cup half empty?
Well, sometimes, someone will say the Nigerian cup might not exactly be half full or half empty. But what if it's 1/8 or 1/10 full? That's basically, if you were to look at the number of people who are doing their best to do the good thing, even though generally we believe and it's our mantra that Nigerians are good people and we are aspiring to be a great nation. However, when we look at the statistics, when we look at just where we are, it doesn't quite show that we're making progress along that line. In some instances, it does appear that we might make some progress, then we retrogress so badly. I do not know whether you've ever, also thought about, just along the same line of this question, which I've also posed, just over the Easter period. If you ever look at where we are as a country, as a people, and you ask how it is that we're so religious. I mean, all of the faiths, the Christians just celebrated Easter, everybody was gay, going to church, and now it is Eid-El-Fitr, and people have gone to the mosque to pray, to thank God for being able to go through the fast. But when we now come to living our daily lives, you have to ask, where is our faith in all of this? How come it is that the people so religious doesn't seem to translate into their daily lives as a people? Do you ever think about it?
I completely agree with you. The paradox is definitely disturbing, and sometimes I feel there's an undue emphasis by some of our religious leaders on rituals at the cost of character and showing compassion and enjoining right, forbidding wrong. The actual work. We seem to be too preoccupied with the outward dimension of religion and very little emphasis on the inward. Having said that, if I try, and this is one of those things Ramadan tries to do as Lent tries to do, if you try to look at it from the perspective of a poor person would tell you, I have never been given as much food as I have during this month. I have never been given as many palliatives by neighbors, charity. Our prayer is that it continues and doesn't just stop with the month. So you are right. If we just look at the behavior of many people, we would say very little improvement. At the same time, it's important that we continue to give thanks, because if you look again at the data, and just look a few countries on the African continent, we thank God we are not South Africa. When you look at you do a Google search for the highest crime rates in Africa, don't even go into the world, because when you start looking at the Americas, your Colombia, Guatemala, Chile, El Salvador, Brazil, when you look at the crime rates in some of these countries, the kidnapping rates, the homicide rates, the drug rates, the rapes, you look at all of those countries, you thank God our own is not as bad. We pray we don't head in that direction. But I think when we look at the data, and especially if you travel and you find whether it's Somalia, whether it is parts of Kenya, you honestly say, I thank God I'm in Nigeria. The amount of free speech we have in Nigeria compared to many other countries, the things you can say and get away with, in many countries in the Middle East, in Southeast Asia, you can't. And so while I agree, we have a very difficult time we are living in, and it seems this is not going away soon, we are also grateful it is not as bad as others. And we should take advantage of the opportunity to just be better and show more gratitude through compassion. Because what we are taught in our religions is giving others is one of those ways of showing appreciation to God. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, whoever doesn't show appreciation to others has not shown appreciation to God. So when we count our blessings, I think we express that in forms of showing goodness to others. And what's interesting is you actually become a happier human being when you make others happy. You can't buy happiness, but it seems happiness is a byproduct of service and sacrificing for others. And so one of those things we learn from our religion is to not just get carried away with the material world, thinking that gives us happiness, but to recognize that it is what we do with our material world that becomes a major source of our happiness. So I agree, there is bad news, but we can focus on it, or we can focus on the fact that, you know what, it's not as bad as others, it's good in many areas, and how can we make it better? Otherwise, honestly, we will demoralize ourselves.
All right, I think Ayo, my colleague in Lagos, has some more questions for you.
Well, thank you,
You're most welcome, Ayo.
Yeah, thank you. It's really good to listen to you, and I wish every cleric would see things the way you do. I don't know if that was the case, the comments of the president during the fasting season would have come up at all. When he was speaking during a Ramadan iftar with some religious leaders as well as traditional rulers, and he was asking them not to denigrate Nigeria in their sermons. First of all, how does that resonate with you? Why was that necessary in the first place? Of course, we know that there have been situations where, as a result of certain rhetorics, some people took actions that they shouldn't have taken simply because they listened to a respected person. It leading to the question of, is there a way to monitor and ensure that such commentaries don't even go out in the first place? Because no one knows how some people will take some of these things. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing for them to internalize it the way they want to internalize it and act accordingly. Do you see anything that can be done to regulate how those rhetorics go out, especially from respected clergymen in any faith? Thankfully, you talked about both faiths earlier.
Because of free speech, which we respect and should respect, it opens the door to the abuse of free speech, unfortunately. It opens the door to hate speech. It opens the door to degrading criticism. And so we should respect free speech and that freedom to criticize, to tell truth to power, to speak out against injustice and wrongdoing. But this should be done with responsibility. And I think it is important for the apex religious organizations, the Christian Association of Nigeria, the Nigerian Supreme Council for Islamic Affairs in particular, but not just on that federal, the national level, but down to the state level, the Catholic network, the Christian Association network within the states, but also the Muslim councils of ulama and heads of Islamic organizations, when they sense a particular person is being too negative about the situation, it's good to empathize, because this person may actually be a victim of state injustice. They may have among their flock people who are suffering and crying. And religious leaders are also supposed to be part of the conscience of the community, to tell leaders and represent represent their flock, that things are not going well, because at least the political leaders get to listen to the religious leader, even though the political leader may not hear the voice of a particular individual in the society. So they play the role of civil society organizations in advocacy. Having said that, if you were to do a Google search for the highest kidnappings in the world, just a simple Google, which country has the highest kidnappings in the world? Consistently, it comes up as being New Zealand or Canada. So this year it's either New Zealand, next year it's Canada. It's not Germany, it's not another country, but I'm talking even among countries that keep data. New Zealand and Canada keep coming up among the highest when it comes to kidnapping, especially child kidnapping. But these countries do not put all of this information out, because for New Zealand, tourism is a big part of their industry. The amount of negative propaganda that Nigerians put against Nigeria surpasses that of any other country. In fact, all other countries put together against us. And so when it comes to our image of ourselves, if what we keep saying to the world is how bad things are, and we never give thanks to God for the good, if all we keep saying is what's wrong with the country, instead of just do what you can in your own circle or sphere of influence, that bad name gives a bad brand. Our rating goes down. Tourism goes down. Everything goes down because if you just, it's like praying bad for your country. May God punish our leaders. May God punish this. Honestly, do you want God to punish your leaders? And, aren't our leaders already bad enough? Our prayer is that the few good ones among them would be better, and those that are bad would be improved. So I think we need to distinguish between telling truth to power, telling the truth to the leadership, what is wrong and how bad it is, from exhibiting contempt, hatred, and exaggerating how bad things are, because that is detrimental. And any religious leader that is just trying to pull Nigeria down is being very irresponsible. And it is the duty of the core religionists, because it's going to be difficult. If you have one hot-headed imam spewing hatred for Nigeria, it's going to be very difficult for a Christian to tell him, "Oh, guy, calm down. We recognize, we can empathize, but come on, it's not all like that." It is easier for the Muslim to control the Muslim loose cannon. Just as the same thing, if you have a Christian spiritual guy who was run wild and is frustrated by the situation, it is easier for Christians to help him, moderate his speech, etc. So I think the religious organizations have a very important responsibility and have the greatest credentials to control the extremism within their flocks. Some benefit from very divisive comments and rhetoric. Some gain more support from the international community if they can say, we have bigger problems in Nigeria, and every ethnic problem, every tribal problem is religious, and we need more money. And then, unfortunately, the international community is more ready to give funding for solving a problem than if you say, actually, our relationship has been improving, or in this area, actually, we don't have these problems. So unfortunately, we do have among religious leaders those who thrive and benefit from hate speech, Fortunately, we have a lot of the parts of the country that are peaceful, and thanks not just to religious leaders, civil society organizations, government officials in various places have been doing their own role to have this synergy of greater impact. So definitely, I think religious leaders have a role to play in controlling their own religious extremists and loose cannons, or those things that have gone wild among their flock.
Interesting perspective on that, particularly the part where you talk about some people profiting from being loose cannons. But you know, there's something you said in your response to one of my first questions, and it just raised the issue of mobilizing young people to my mind. They are highly impressionable. And we talk about, I mean, I'm grateful you talked about the numbers, the numbers of nations with the highest cases of kidnapping in the world, and Nigeria didn't come anywhere, you know, at the top. Be that as it may, there are those who would have seen all kinds of videos of young people being used and manipulated for various things. What should we be telling them? I mean, the question that I asked earlier about those rhetorics, the people that are most affected are the young people because they just get up and go. What are the things that we should be telling young people to, one, counter those negative narratives that they have believed over time, and two, position their minds towards the message of hope that you have been talking about all the while? What should the federal government do? What should the states themselves do? What should religious leaders do? How do we communicate to young people so that they can take ownership of their future and not allow themselves to be bogged down by the present?
I think one very important thing is to do more and talk less. Generally, and I'm not belittling the importance of words. Words move mountains. The legacy of our greatest inspirers, whether it's Jesus, Muhammad, Moses, any of these great individuals, what they left as their legacy was in the form of knowledge. And this knowledge has built institutions, hospitals, schools. It's moved mountains. So I'm not belittling the importance of talking. But idle hands become the devil's workshop. If our youth are not engaged in productive work, then naturally they will get frustrated. What we find is very gross inequality in Nigeria, and it's increasing. If you look at the index used to measure inequality in wealth, the Gini index, online, and you find how the gap between the rich and the poor in South Africa is among the highest in the world, you will appreciate why they have so many problems. And so it is important that the government takes active roles, more proactive roles, and not just the government. You know, one of those things that I appreciate with churches is nearly every church has a school beside it. Yes, this trend is beginning to come up among mosques, but this is one deficiency within the Muslim community that many Muslim religious leaders will mention, that many within the community have not taken education as importantly as they should. It's being left to government to decide. And when we have interfaith engagement, meetings with Christian leaders and Muslim leaders, one of those questions we try to ask them, what is it about the other religion in Nigeria? What is it about them that you appreciate? What do you appreciate? And among those things that the Christians would say they appreciate of Muslims is they would say Muslims are united. Muslims are very charitable. And, you know, you ask these, how can you say we are charitable? Look at all these almajiris. And one guy said, all these almajiris that you are looking around, you know, you see them. In our part of the country, they would have been gangsters. They don't come to beg with a bowl in their hand. They come to beg with a knife or a gun in their hand. So it is better that they are begging with bowls and that you continue to give. Otherwise, they will not die of hunger. They will find ways, and unfortunately, it would be criminal. So what we find is good practices within both religious communities and the need to appreciate the good in the other, to try and see how that can help a positive competition. The Quran tells us, had God willed, he would have made us all one community. You know, وَلَوْ شَاءَ رَبُّكَ لَجَعَلَكُمْ أُمَّةً وَاحِدَةً. God would have made us one. But he has made us different, and he would test us with what he has given us. But then he says, فَاسْتَبِقُوا الْخَيْرَاتِ. Compete in the doing of good. Compete in the doing of good. In another verse of the Quran, Allah says, تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى. You know, cooperate in the doing of good. So we can compete and inspire each other, but we can also cooperate and inspire each other. And I would say we need to have more entrepreneurs. We need to find ways of building the capacities of our people to, instead of pushing wheelbarrows, selling sugarcane, no skill, let us have institutions. And I'm very happy that the government, starting with the last government, has had this, establishing this Al-Majri Commission. But not just that, any commission that is dealing with youth, with young people, to see how to build their capacity so that everybody has something doing, especially in the area of vocational training. The current president did a lot of that, along with many of the other governors in Lagos State, in building capacities of the youth. Those of us who remember what Oshodi looked like in Lagos, if Lagos can change, where else cannot change? If you look at what Zulum has been doing for youth empowerment in Maiduguri, if it can work in Maiduguri, where can it not work? We're looking at the, you know, and there are many other examples of this across the country. Be good and, you know, have more hope. Otherwise, idle hands are the devil's workshop. And we've got enough devils to utilize our youth, unfortunately.
You know, Sheikh, you make a very interesting point. I mean, one that across board is something that we need to keep highlighting, both for the religious faith and across board, to ensure that entrepreneurship, we mainstream that narrative in all of those spaces, because without that, God will not come from heaven to do anything for anyone. So we do thank you and appreciate your time this morning, Sheikh Nuruddin Lemu, Director of Research and Training at the Dawah Institute of Nigeria. Thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you very much, Chamberlain.
Hello, good morning, everybody.